It becomes always perplexing and puzzling to me how indeed human beings can perpetrate such wanton evil. And I ask myself a question such as, don't these criminals, don't these pimps, in effect, have daughters? When it comes to, again, the gross underside of human behavior, and I think of the perpetration of genocide in that class too, I come up against a brick wall of unknowing. It becomes very difficult to fathom.
You know, Joe, so do I.
Right, okay, fair enough.
That's why I wrote the book. I tried to get to the underbelly of all of this. One point in the book, she screams at this guy, you know, don't you think all these children have fathers and mothers? This guy's daughter's going to Harvard, you know, he's a, you know, trafficker in India. Don't you think these children all have mothers and fathers? I don't think there's any understanding in this question. I think it gets down to greed, money, power, you know, power over people, using people like, you know, Kleenex, discarding them like that. And I don't think there really is an answer. How can you delve into the psyche of a person doing this and come up with an answer? It's beyond. You know?
Well, I think the two of us have answers. You go first.
Go ahead.
So I have something to add to that. We're really busy looking at a problem in a very, that this is an evil problem, like you even, in your question you said, what about this evil, this criminal-minded people, don't they have daughters? The play that I wrote and performed is about a prostitute, her daughter, a pimp, and you know, there's a customer and all those factors, but the prostitute is very clear that her daughter has no other future but to become a prostitute. And the pimp actually treats this girl as a sister. At the same time, this is the business they're in. So also, a lot of these pimps aren't like, you know, normal kids. They didn't have a normal childhood. Most of them did not have a normal childhood. They probably grew up in and around brothels or in cartels or, you know, around crime. So they don't really even know what normal childhood is. In fact, I would assert that these kids never had childhood. It was probably stolen away from them. So, well, when they are pimps, they might have daughters and they might force their daughters into prostitution because that's what they think is the best thing to do for their daughters. It's just like one side of it. And the problem is so deep-rooted and it's so multifaceted. It's like, you know, in India, in the mythology, you have this demon with 10 heads. It's like that. It's like, this isn't just one thing. It's not just poverty. It's not just, you know, it's not just like, okay, these people just don't know any other worlds and stuff. But there's just like so many different facets to the whole problem. So I think more than focusing on the problem, it would be great to start focusing on the solution.
Okay, well, we'll get there, yeah.
I would like to just add another angle to it. And you mentioned the Holocaust, but I want to go back further than that and understand the culture of American slavery and the American slave trade. And I'm going to do a very quick history lesson because I write about legal history. In 1607, the Virginia colony was founded. It was the first permanent English colony. In 1619, 20 Africans were introduced into that colony. There were no slave laws at the time. Those Africans from the Angola region of Africa knew how to farm. The city urbanites from London and other parts of England who had been transplanted to Virginia for that colony did not. They were dying like flies in a swampland of diseases. And so they learned something from the Africans, how to grow tobacco. Initially, those Africans were not treated as actual slaves because there were no slave laws, there were indentured servant laws. What we learn is greed then plays this factor. Because the greed factor, which I think is hand in hand with the poverty factor, was that we had an African couple, Maria and Anthony Johnson. Their last name was not Johnson back then, as they didn't live next to the Smiths in Africa, but their names have been changed to Johnson. They were the first African couple, and they had land and servants of their own. In the 1600s, white and black servants. But then they changed the laws because they had no political power, which is the other element we haven't really talked about. The fact that these are marginalized groups, and they're groups for the most part who are without political power. And so the laws changed so that by the 1680 law of Virginia, these Africans had been stripped of their human rights. They had been stripped of their human dignity. They had been stripped of their right of self-defense. So now we have greed play this major role. Political power play this major role because the landowners were the ones who were also the lawmakers. And because they wanted to increase their profit, they took away the rights of the Africans. And they began to use them as tissue in the same way. Those same women became the sexual objects. The laws were changed so that the issue of those women, the children, did not have any rights against their English fathers. All of this took place in a span of 50 to 60 years. So we know this institution remained until 1863. So when we think about what greed can do, it becomes a matter of culture. Mm-hmm. This is the culture that we've been growing into. This is the culture that we've grown up in. This is the culture that we have. And this is the culture now people want to fight to maintain. We are still wrestling as a nation with the sexualization of the woman of color. To this day, the laws have changed, the traditions remain. So when we look aghast at what's happening in these little villages in Pakistan, these little villages in India, and we look down and say, how can these people do this? How did we do this for 350 years? How did we then have to have so much happen, so many lives lost in order for us to change? But I want to also speak about the solution because there can be change. We did it before and we can do it again.